Hi everyone, my name is Paul Manna. I'm a professor of government and the director of the public policy program at William & Mary. It's really a pleasure to have a chance to join you for the discussion today, even though I'm joining you in a video form. I'm so pleased to be able to share some ideas to kick off some conversation about this new report that I have out from the Wallace Foundation. And so the title of the talk, to get us just right into the subject here, is how state policy levers can support school district principal pipeline efforts. And what I'm trying to do in this report is to pull together two strands of thinking. One strand of thinking focused on state policy and the things that state policymakers can do as they support the development of excellent principals in their states. And the other strand is on local school districts and the principal pipeline efforts that they might create. So this report is really about trying to bring those two sets of dialogue into conversation with one another, so we can think about how states and localities might be working together at the nexus of their two different respective efforts. So let's hop right into this and get into the conversation. The first thing that I want to note, kind of an organizing point, is to say that state policy combined with local policy and practice can have powerful impacts on the development of school principals across a state. This is a really important point to remember because often in states people will think that the development of excellent principals is really a local school district function. But we know that states have important roles to play in creating the environments where excellent principals can be identified, developed, and can flourish. And so this gets back to some conversation that I had in an earlier report. This is an older report from 2015 on the different kinds of state policy levers that can help support principal development. We see at this list of 6 levers, there are lots of areas where states have important responsibilities for crafting policy that can influence who might decide to become a principal, the training they might receive, the onboarding or the joining of the profession that might happen for them, and also then the ongoing support and evaluation that they might enjoy when they are principals on the job. And so states have a role to play, and like I said, there's a strand of discussion, there's a strand of literature that focuses on those kinds of things. There's also, though, a strand of literature, and a really developed strand of literature, in fact, on principal pipelines and how comprehensive and aligned pipeline efforts can develop and support principals in local school districts. This is a diagram of the principal pipeline model that appears in my report, and it's appeared in some other places from the Wallace Foundation. And the thing to emphasize here is all these moving parts, how they connect, how they kind of support this comprehensive way of thinking about principals, from originally identifying who they might be up through the ongoing evaluation and support that they might have, and these ongoing systems in the background that will help support and bolster this overall effort. And a lot of the discussion about principal pipelines that has existed up to this point has really been focused on efforts of local school districts, and primarily large local school districts that have the resources and support and know-how and local partners to carry these things out. But really what I'm trying to do in this new report is to talk about how these local efforts can align with state efforts, and we can get this kind of effort going on in multiple places around the country. And so that brings to my second point: how might we consider the relationships between state policy levers to support principal development and these local principal pipelines? That's the topic of this report that I'm hoping that you'll enjoy and that will be useful for you as you pursue your own efforts. What I'm encouraging people to do in this report is to envision what I'm calling the state-local nexus for principal pipeline development. In other words, thinking about those state policy levers and what they might be able to do and support, how might that work overlap with what local principal pipeline enthusiasts are trying to do as they get principal pipelines off the ground and try to support them. And so when you dig into this report and look at it, what you're going to see is a report organized around the different dimensions of principal pipelines and some key questions that we might ask about state policy if we were to have state policy that would bolster and support those local efforts. I want to just give you one example of that from the report so you can see what I'm talking about. Here the example is state policy levers and how they might support local principal pipelines as they go about the business of selective hiring and placement. So trying to identify the right person for the job and getting them in that right school for them where they would be able to thrive and have the most positive impact. And so if you look at this example, and I don't want to focus on the entire slide, but just focus on the last two elements here, talking about licensing and placement and evaluation. So if we were to think about selective hiring and placement from the local pipeline point of view, how might state policy be a supportive force in that selective hiring and placement? Well, one way that it can be a supportive force is if we think about licensing practices. Do state principal licensing policies and expectations actually encourage principals to have experiences that are practice-based, that are grounded in the day-to-day experiences they will have as principals, instead of having licensing policies and practices that are really, sort of test-based or pencil paper type exercises? If we can try to have states developing licensing procedures for new principals that are grounded more in actual practice, that's going to really help local school districts developing pipelines to know where people might be able to have a more effective placement. Similarly, you could think about state policies for evaluation. What kinds of incentives do state policies create when they evaluate principals? And do they actually help create incentives so that principals coming out of principal pipeline efforts at the local level would be encouraged to take on the most difficult assignments? This is really a challenging thing, right? Because if you have a principal who might be well suited to take on an assignment in a very difficult school, you would want to have that principal be encouraged via evaluation incentives to actually take that placement. But that might not be the case if if evaluation incentives are setting up a principal to fail, right? If the state evaluation system makes it really impossible for principals to be evaluated favorably when they decide to take on assignments that might be several years until they can really get traction and turn a school around so that they would be achieving at the highest possible levels. And so we want to obviously have evaluation systems that encourage principals to be driving their schools towards high achievement and high success, but we don't want those evaluation systems to be set up in such a way that they would simply demand that a principal would be defined as a failure for the first 1 or 2 years that they might have one of those challenging assignments. So that's one example. There are many others in the report, and they're set up in these same ways to have these guiding questions that hopefully will stoke some really interesting conversations with you and your partners in your own states. So that's where I want to wrap up this brief introduction, and I hope the discussion is really robust and interesting. And also, I want to invite you to just reach out anytime if you'd like to continue the conversation. My contact information is here, and I'm pleased to take any kind of inquiry that you might have as you carry out this very, very important work. So with that, let me close, and let me thank everyone again. Thank my friends at AASA. Let me thank my friend Jackie Wilson for moderating this excellent panel. And let me thank all the panelists who are joining in the conversation with you all today. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.